Hello, shalom, shalom, friends. Thank you so much for being here. We're so glad you could learn with us today. And on this great topic, Serach bat Asher, the most underrated woman in the Tanach, with a great master teacher, Rabbanit Bracha Jaffe, who we're looking forward to learning from. We're thrilled to partner today with our great friends at BMH-BJ in Denver, Colorado. And grateful to see my wonderful colleague here, Rabbi Yaakov Chaitovsky. And I'm going to hand it over to him to introduce the program and introduce our great speaker today. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you, everyone. We're in for a real treat today to learn not only with someone amazing, but about someone amazing, Serach bat Asher. And we're going to be enlightened by Rabbanit Bracha Jaffe, who is the Associate Rabbah at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale in the Bronx, New York. She does the full gamut of rabbinic responsibility, from teaching Torah classes, conversion programs, answering halachic questions, pastoral guidance, life cycle events, you name it. She has done it. She's taught people to lane. You can find her reading selections from 4 Megillot and Torah portions on the JOFA, that's the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, on their website. And she's passionate also about enlightening people about the ins and outs of mental illness, to bring it out of the shadows, and has spoken about that in different settings. She's a connector and loves to encourage people to be their best selves. I would not cross her because she's an avid kickboxer, in addition to reading books to her grandchildren. She lives in Riverdale, and she is married to Martin. And without any further ado, I will mute, and Rabbanit Bracha Jaffe will take over.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Yaakov. And I go back to a few years ago when I met him through a mutual friend in Baltimore. Thank you, everybody, for coming on. It's never obvious that people will take time out of the middle of their day, so I'm really delighted and happy that it's recorded for people who don't have time to take in the middle of the day. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's really one of my very favorite shiurim classes for many reasons. One of them is because I get to highlight a woman in the Torah, in the Tanach, in the Bible, which doesn't happen that often. And secondly, because it gives me an opportunity. Oh, somebody from Riverdale's on too. Hi, Judy. Hi, everybody. It gives me an opportunity to explain how Midrash is created from Peshat. So first I want to explain what Peshat is and what Derash is. The word Peshat comes from the word Pashut, which means simple. And it is a simple reading of the text. Simple, basic reading, no embellishments, a reading of the text. Whereas Derash, as my granddaughter who just turned bat mitzvah, she's 12. When she was 5 years old, and we were talking about the difference, she's Israeli, I'm Israeli, my children and grandchildren all live in Israel. She was explaining the difference between Peshat and Derash. And she said, I know, Safti, that's what they call me. Peshat is when you explain the words in the verse. Derash is when you explain the words in the verse, but it's not written in the words themselves. And that gives an opportunity to add stories, for example, which fill in the spaces and the places that are missing when you just read the simple text. Now, here's an example of a drash that actually is a fallacy. Who here knows what the fruit is in the Garden of Eden? Anybody here? Anybody? You can unmute. Go for it. Anybody know? Any thoughts? How many people? Apple. Great.
Apples.
Fig and dates. Apple. Okay, great. So it turns out that it doesn't say apple anywhere. And somebody, I think actually Rembrandt or somebody drew a painting of the tree and there was an apple on it and people thought it was an apple. But our sages in the Gemara, in the Talmud, they actually, whoever was who said fig or date, so they gave, for example, the etrog, what we use, I don't have one here, the one we use on Sukkot, which we shake, they might have picked some of them picked a different fruit, which was a fruit that indigenous to Israel, or one that's an aphrodisiac, so they had reasons for it. But apple wasn't part of any of that. I don't think apples grew naturally in Israel or in that area. So that's an example of a midrash when somebody embellished. But what I'm going to tell you is actually how our sages, because in this case it was the midrashim that I'll be helping you with, that I'll be sharing with you, are actually from our sages, not written recently, where women had more of an opportunity to write, but how they got from the words that are written in the Torah to the mountain of midrashim and stories written about Serach. So first of all, just tell me, you're not all on camera, but if you're not on camera, and you can still raise your hand, I think. So how many people have heard of Serach? 1, 2, great. 2, 3. Hannah, great. I don't know who Aglaia is, but great.
Aglaia.
Aglaia. Oh, that's your full name. I thought it was Aglaia. Beautiful. Aglaia, beautiful. And okay, and Karen, I see you raise your hand. Awesome. So maybe about half, and those who raise your hand, if you know how to put it down, you can put it down so you can ask another question. So some of you have heard and some of you have not heard of Serach. I hope that by the time we finish this class, you will say, I totally know who Serach is. I know all about her. I know what's written about her in the Torah, because she's really only written in the Torah. That's the first 5 books of Moses. The one we just started now, Genesis, we just started the first one. We finished the last one on Simchat Torah, on Simchas Torah. All right, friends. I will encourage you to either raise your hand or unmute if you have a question, because as I'm sharing the screen, it's a little bit harder always for me to see if somebody raised their hand. So please feel free to do that. Okay. The first thing we're going to do is to read, where is Serach in the Torah? And I want to tell you who Serach is. If we start from Abraham, our first forefather, Jewish forefather, he had a son named Yitzchak, or Isaac, who had a son named Yaakov, or Jacob. And one of the 12 sons of Yaakov's name was Asher, or Asher. Asher had a daughter named Serach. So here you see the lineage of how you get to Serach. So this is very, very ancient. This is really at the beginning of our Jewish history. Abraham to Isaac to Jacob to Asher. Now, if I had to ask people here, just stopping for a minute, how many times were daughters of Jacob mentioned in the Torah? He had 12 sons. We know all about them.
Not often.
What?
Not often.
Not for 2. Good, Hannah and Judy. I see that. So we have the daughter of Jacob, who is Dinah. Maybe that's who. Dinah. Excellent. Yeah. And then we have a granddaughter, but I don't think there were any other granddaughters or women even mentioned. So that already is a clue that Serach must be important, because the Torah, the Bible, is not an exact history book. It doesn't just tell everything that happened. It zooms in on details that are important. So, what can you do? The men were the ones who passed down the lineage. They're the ones who owned land. They're the ones who mostly made things happen in the story of our people, of the Jewish people. But sometimes there was a woman, for example, Moses' sister Miriam. She was an important woman, so we heard about her. Or Moshe's mother, Yocheved, we heard about her. There are other women who are mentioned. Chava, Eve, the wife of Adam, she's mentioned. But in this level of the children of Jacob, Yaakov, and the grandchildren, the only ones mentioned are Dinah, so she had an important role. We're not talking about that. And Serach. So the first clue that we know that something about Serach we need to know is the fact that she is even mentioned. And now we're going to see where she is mentioned. The first time she's mentioned, the book of Bereshit, the book of Genesis, gives us a lot of lineages, toldot, a lot of them, all through the book. And here's one of them in chapter 46. The sons of Asher. So remember what we said. There's Jacob, he has 12 sons. One of them is Asher. And it says, the sons of Asher are Yimna, Ishva, Yishvi, Beriah, and Serach Achotam. Serach, their sister. And then it continues, the sons of Beriah are Chever and Malkiel. This is the first time that we meet Serach, that she appears. When she appears in Genesis and Bereshit, when there is some list of children and grandchildren of Yaakov, of Jacob. It's the first time. So this is pretty ancient. This is before the Israelites went down to Egypt. This is still when they're in the land of Canaan, and the Torah lists them a number of times so that we know how many Jews, how many Israelites went down to Egypt before the whole thing of being enslaved by Pharaoh and being rescued and being given the commandments and going around the desert. We're before then. We are way before then. So we know that there's something about Serach that's important. And then let's look for the next time. She's only mentioned twice. 6 words. 2 words in Genesis, and now we're going to find the second time. As I said, that very often the Jews, the Israelites, Bnei Israel, were counted. So for different reasons, sometimes it's because God is showing God's love. This is how I count them. Sometimes it's a list of lineage to teach us who the princes were. Sometimes it's, in this case, for example, there was a plague because they had rebelled against God, and God was counting again to see who was left after the plague. So that's what happens in Numbers. It was after the plague, Acharei Magefa, the Lord spoke to Moshe and to Eleazar. So Eleazar was the son of Moses' brother Aaron. He was also a priest, a Kohen, because he's the son of a priest. And they were leaders in the community, Moshe and Eleazar. So God spoke to Moshe and Eleazar and said, it's time. You should count, take a census of the entire community of the children of Israel. But only from 20 years old and above, according to their paternal household. So we're only talking actually about men. Why? Because it says all who are fit to go to war among Israel. And at the time, now today, there are chayalot, there are female soldiers. Sadly, there are also female soldiers who were killed. But there are female soldiers who are in active combat duty or in many roles in the Israeli army. However, at the time, women did not go to war, and they were not counted among those who go to war. But look at that. That was at the beginning of the chapter. That's the heading of 26, of chapter 26. But when we get down to Asher, he's kind of low down on the totem pole. He's not one of the first 6. He's pushed down. He's not one of the tops. We went all the way down to verses 44 and 47. And here we have the descendants of Asher according to their families. The family of Yimnah, I just want to remind you, remember, we had Yimnah, Yishva, Yishvi, and Beriah. So here we go. The family of the Yishvites from Yishvi, the family of the Be'erites from Beriah. They're missing somebody, Yishvi, I don't know, one of the Yishvis. And then from the descendants of Beriah, the family of, Beriah's children, the family of the Malkielites, Malkieli from Malkiel. Oops! Then all of a sudden we have a verse. The name of Asher's daughter was Serach. The name of Asher's daughter was Serach. So I want to point out a few things. First of all, here, Serach is mentioned as their sister. And here she is mentioned as Asher's daughter. So going back to seeing everybody, I want to have a conversation with you. We now see that she has been mentioned twice. Just from the fact that she was mentioned in Genesis, and then she was mentioned in Numbers when they're in the desert, when the Israelites are in the desert, what can people conclude from that? Any thoughts? Anything come up for you?
There's something important about her.
Because she's mentioned twice. Great. What else?
She's lived a long time.
Nice. She's lived. Who said that? Just identify yourself, because I have a lot of people on the screen. Ilana. So Ilana says she's lived a long time. Ilana, can you elaborate on that? Explain what you mean.
Well, they've already been to Egypt and back.
Right. So how many years were they in Egypt? 210 years. And remember, she was alive before they went down to Egypt, and she was already a little bit grown up because Asher already had grandchildren. So let's say she was, 20. So that's already 230 years. And now they're wandering around the desert. So They're in the desert for 40 years. This is towards the end. So she's at least 250. Everybody get that? Does that make sense to people, what I said? 210, plus she was, let's say, 20 years old in Breshit, in Genesis. And then she's, let's say they've been in the desert for about 20 years, so she's about 250. People with me? If you're not, let me know. But she's around 250. Does that make sense to people? Right. Thank you. Thank you for nodding, Sue. That's helpful. If nobody says no, I'll assume that you get it and you agree. So she's 250 at a time when people were not living that long. Remember, Moshe, is of that same generation in the desert. He dies at the end of the desert, and it's a big deal that he lived till 120. This is already twice as long as that. And she's been living from a long time ago. But now I have a question for you. If the Torah wanted to tell us that Serach lived a long time, do we need to mention her both in Genesis and in Numbers? If the Torah wanted to tell us, because that seems to be what the Torah is telling us, yes, that she's important, but we already know she's important if she's even mentioned once. We don't know why she's important yet, but we know she's important. But if the Torah wanted to remind us, to tell us that Serach lived a long time, she's already 250, let's just take that as a baseline, do we need to have her mentioned both in Bereshit and Genesis as well as in Numbers? Any thoughts? Please, Glea, if I pronounced that correctly. Please.
Yes. Well, am I allowed to give the spoiler alert?
What's the spoiler? I know, I just want you to answer this question.
Okay, because she's going to actually do something in Numbers, and so she's important for something in particular in Numbers.
No, she doesn't. Not in the Peshat. I'm only giving you the text now.
Oh,
She
okay.
doesn't appear anywhere else. I'm going to build the Midrashim. I mean, if you know all the Midrashim, great. But then, you'll hear everything. That's what I'm showing you, is how do we get from the Peshat, the simple reading of the text. I just brought you the two places that Serach is mentioned. She is not mentioned anywhere else in our biblical text. You're telling us there's going to be Midrashim. That's what I said. We're going to move from the Peshat to the Midrash. But if the Torah wanted to let us know that she's 250 years old now, do we need both places? Bob?
We don't need Genesis. I mean,
We don't need Genesis. We don't need Genesis. Now, obviously, go on.
Okay, just a question. Do we necessarily conclude from the fact that she's mentioned in Numbers that she's still alive at that point?
I think so, because they're only numbering those who are alive. That's who they're numbering. That is what the numbering is, those who are alive. I mean, I hear your question, but that's how they do a census. A census is those who are alive.
Okay.
It's a census of those who are alive. Aglaia, just wanted to make sure you didn't want to say something else.
Nope, I'm good.
Okay, awesome. Looking forward to hearing more. Judy Shear.
I actually had the same question about assuming that she's still alive. She's mentioned as Asher's daughter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are we assuming Asher is still alive?
No, but he's not mentioned. He's just mentioned as her lineage. Ubenei Asher, if we look, I mean, I could put up the source, but the children of Asher, according to their families. When God tells them to take a census, it's always about who's left, who's around, who's alive. That's what the census is. I mean, you could say, well, why mention her if she died? Like, what would be the point? If everybody else who's mentioned are those who are alive. Judy, do you see what I'm saying?
I just had the same feeling that she.
No, 100%. But then what? So it's an interesting question. Yeah, go on.
I would be able to say she's just mentioned again because she's important. There was something about her in Genesis that made them mention her. Now, are you saying there she's listed as granddaughter of Asher?
No, daughter of Asher, Serach bat Asher. Let me put it up again. So, can we share the sources so people who want to look on their own can find them? I don't know if that's in the chat. No. So is it possible? Because I sent you the file. This way people who wish to can have the sources up all the time. I have it printed out next to me. I'm going to read it to you, actually. I have it printed out. The descendants of Asher, according to their families, blah, 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 the men, The name of Asher's daughter was Serach. That's what it says. Numbers 26:46. And again, I hear the question, but every other time the census says who's alive. So, and especially in the desert, that's who it is. So to mention her, to say, oh, look back at Genesis, she used to be important, that feels a little odd, I would say. Why mention her again? Oh, thank you so much. Thank you. Okay. So unless somebody has something else. So first of all, we know she's important. We already know she's important because she was mentioned in Genesis. Yes, Aglaia. And please correct me if I say it wrong. I apologize.
Oh no, you're saying it right, actually. Okay, so like, the only other thing that I can think of is that, like, I put it in the chat box because I wasn't thinking though, but she's the last person of that particular generation that we know of, at least.
Correct. Yes. Certainly who's alive, because she's 250.
Yeah, so basically though, like, I don't know if, like, it might have been because, well, they're trying to account for each generation also, so.
Well, they accounted. I mean, no, they have it because we have her brothers.
Are they alive still in numbers?
No. You're saying accounting. So she's the only one that's alive. No, that is correct. I agree with you. I thought you were answering about whether she's alive or not. Her brothers are mentioned, but they're only mentioned in lineage. Right? It's the person who's counted who is the person who's alive, not their lineage. So if it says the descendants of Asher, the family of Yishvi, the descendants of Bria, the families of Malkielites, those are their children or grandchildren. But the name of Asher's daughter was Serach, means Serach is alive. And I agree. She's the only one left from that, not just that generation, that time period in general. There's nobody else that we know of who is 250 years old. Everybody with me on that? We good? Okay, awesome. Great. So now again, moving from Peshat to Derash, the rabbis, the sages, are saying, wait a second. Not only is she mentioned in Genesis, she's also mentioned. So therefore, she must have had a role in Numbers, having lived a long life. But she also, maybe Genesis can shed light on what that role was. Like, does it say anywhere why she was important? No. Does it say anywhere what her role was? No. And yet those who know the Midrashim, and I'm sure there's somebody on this chat who have heard, she lived a long life, she did this, she had a role to play, as Aglaia tried to tell us, but I stopped her because I want to make sure we see it inside. They imagined amazing roles for her, but now I want to go into why. How could they imagine it? So the first thing I'm going to show is other roles that women had. What roles do we know that women had? For example, we know that they shepherded flocks. That could be one. We know that about Rachel. We know that about the Tzipporah and her sisters. We know in general that very often women, we also, Rebecca, Rivka, came to the well. So we know that's one option. But here's a second option. If we look back to the beginning of Genesis, when everything was being invented and created, it says that Tzila bore somebody named Tuval Cain. What did Tuval Cain do? He was the forger of every cutting instrument of brass and iron. And his sister's name was Naamah. So there's a Midrash on it saying there's a reason she was called. Like, again, why was Naamah mentioned? It doesn't say what she did. But our sages said, well, one second. We know this verse is all about the names of the people who were born, as well as the inventors of something. So they said there must be a reason. Naamah has within it the word na'im, pleasing or pleasant. It says her ways were pleasant. She would delight with playing the drums, like the tambourine, to her gods. She wasn't Jewish yet, so not one god. So here we have a thread of a connection that maybe that's why we're going to see that they imagined that Serach was somebody who sang. And we can see how the same sages, or sages who came after them, imagined that women could do that. I mean, we could see that women sing to their children and were pleasant to have as singers, especially if the men are out waging war or tilling the land or whatever it is that men are doing. And again, please, if you have a question or a comment, please let me know, because I'm going to be building this on each other. Mothers helping Jacob deceive Isaac. Yep. I don't know if that's why she's mentioned, but that's an interesting point. That is not what our sages imagined for her. So Sue says she feels like the first mention is foreshadowing the second. It is, but why, again, why need her? Yeah, maybe that's the right way to say it. Foreshadowing by saying, "Oh, you want to know about how she got to live such a long life? Well, let's look back in Bereshit, Genesis, the first time she's mentioned, and see if we can imagine what she might have done there that would merit her, because it is considered merit, even though if anybody here saw the what is it called, the Last Mile or the Long Mile, I can't remember, which is a story of men on death row. Anybody see that? It's a terrific movie, and books by Stephen King, I think. And there's a man there who's kind of blessed by an angel, it turns
Green
out.
Mile.
The Green Mile, thank you. The Green Mile. And he ends up living a very long life. And he said, because he never got sick. And he said, like, it wasn't such a blessing for me because all my friends died, my children died, people died. So I always remember that. But in the Torah, it is considered a blessing to live a long life. And we do, at least, we wish people live till 120, which is what Moses lived to. Okay. So now we're going to start seeing the Midrashim that were imagined about her. So give me 1 second. Okay. Did I miss 4 and 5? No, we got that here. I just want to remind people that the minstrel who was around, let's say, in the Middle Ages, that's the way stories were passed down. There's a lot of stories or lore about the role of minstrels. That's how legends got passed down. That's how they soothed often emotions or riled people up. And that might be why the sages imagined that Na'amah, which means pleasant, did that. She was a singer. She played drums. Okay, let's read. I know it's in front of you, but I'm going to read it. The book of Asher, let's just look at the footnote to see what it is. It's a Hebrew midrash named after the lost book of Asher, which is actually mentioned in Samuel 2. And you have the sources, so you can look that up if you want. The brothers, okay, she lived around the time when Joseph, one of the 12 brothers, who was a dreamer and jealous, his brothers were jealous of him, and they ended up throwing him into a pit and then selling him down to Egypt. So she lived at this time. Just putting it in context in Genesis, because her father is Asher, and Asher is Joseph's brother. Now, Asher was older than Joseph, than Yosef. Yosef was born towards the end of the 12 brothers. So it makes a lot of sense that she was already around at that time. The brothers, meaning Joseph's brothers, said to each other, what shall we do? Context. They have now discovered Joseph in Egypt. They had promised Yaakov, their father, that their brother Yosef they brought a bloody tunic, and they showed Yaakov and Jacob and told him that Yosef had been killed, torn apart. Now, there are Midrashim that say that Yaakov never really believed them, that he never was comforted, but we'll put that aside. Until now, as far as they know, Yaakov, Jacob, their father, believed them, even though they're always looking for Yosef. Every time they go down to Egypt, they say, oh, one is missing. They don't say one had died torn apart by wild beasts or by a goat, but rather they say one is missing, achadeinenu. They're always looking for him, and they found him because he was the viceroy of Egypt. But now they have a task to break the news to their father. They already broke the news that he had died, he was bereft, and now they need to break the news the other way. That's the setting for this midrash I am about to share. It is source 6 for those following along. The brothers said to each other, what shall we do in this matter before our father Jacob? If we come to him suddenly and tell him about Joseph, he'll be greatly alarmed. He won't even believe us because we're the ones who told him that Joseph was dead. And on the way, they found Serach, daughter of Asher, going forth to meet them. And the damsel was very good and subtle and knew how to play the harp. They said, go now before our father, meaning their father, it's her grandfather, sit before him, strike on the harp, and speak these words, breaking the news to Yaakov, to her grandfather. She came and sat near Jacob. She played well and sang, and uttered in the sweetness of her words, Joseph, my uncle, is living. He rules throughout the land of Egypt and is not dead. He listened while she repeated them twice and thrice, And joy entered the heart of Jacob at the sweetness of her words, and the Spirit of God was upon him, and he had kind of prophecy, and he knew her words were true. We believe that they had prophecy, our forefathers. And what did he do? Yaakov blessed Serach when she spoke those words and said, "My daughter, may death never prevail over you, because you have revived my spirit." So according to this Midrash, she broke the news in a beautiful, soft, gentle, sweet way to her grandfather, and he blessed her, and he had the ability to bless, saying, "You revived me so I wouldn't feel like I'm dead from sorrow. My soul was dead without Yosef. Therefore, you will now be blessed that you will never die. You will continually have life." This is our first source of where we would get that Serach lived a long, why she lived a long life. I hope people are with me. Questions, please feel comfortable asking questions. And I read somewhere this beautiful idea that maybe Yaakov sang lullabies to her as a child and sang to her, and now here's her opportunity to sing to him, which I thought was such a sweet idea. And that's why maybe they had a special relationship, because he probably had many grandchildren, but maybe they had a special relationship, and maybe she would soothe him and sing to him because he was so sad that Yosef was gone. So this idea that, we can give back to our grandparents or our parents in the same way feels very, very beautiful.
So what is this? Where is this book of Yasher from, or when?
You can look it up, but it's a Hebrew Midrash called Sefer HaYashar. Be glad for you to, I just did a short, but you can look it up. Google it and try to find it. A Hebrew Midrash. Sefer. I looked at like every single Midrash I could find about a Serach before I put all this together. Okay. And its name, and there is a book, that's what's so interesting. There's a book of Yashar or Jasher mentioned in Samuel too. So, you could start there and then maybe find it. Yeah. I don't know if all of it is available or just parts of it. Okay. Now, I have to read this. This is for those who know Hebrew. Look how beautiful. This is a different Midrash. How did she do it? She waited till he was standing in prayer, maybe saying Shema Yisrael or whatever prayer, and said in a tone of amazement and wonder, "Yosef b'Mitzrayim, yoldu lo al birkayim Menashe ve'Ephraim." Listen to the beautiful rhymes. Yosef b'Mitzrayim, Yosef is in Egypt. Mitzrayim, yoldu lo al birkayim, they've been born on his knees. That's a way of saying that you have children. Birkayim, Menashe ve'Ephraim, his two sons, Menashe and Ephraim. And that's, I should put it to tune once, like, b'Mitzrayim, yoldu lo al birkayim, right? That would be sweet if we could find a tune for that. And one of the Midrashim not only imagined that she broke the news, but she did it in this beautiful way where there were rhymes. And we know that it's beautiful to hear songs. I've heard songs that have moved my soul. Sometimes it's the story in the song. And why are poets or songwriters moved to write things in song? Because song can move our soul in a way that prose does not. And it touches us in a way that prose does not. And now I'm moving to a different Midrash, which explains in a slightly different way why she was blessed this way. So, Otsar HaMidrashim, this is a different set of Midrashim, says about Serach bat Asher, this is about her, I believe, I don't know if this is I don't remember. Oh, it's on Genesis. So what does it say? Because she told Yaakov, Yosef is alive, Yaakov said to her, the mouth that told me about Yosef being alive will never taste the taste of death. So one is about, you revived my spirit. The other one is that your mouth sang to me, so it will never taste death. That's an expression in Hebrew and in English, the taste of death. It will never taste death. So that's a slightly different twist on it, and it's actually important because peh, mouth, is also a letter in the Hebrew language. It is the letter pei, and the letter pei, or peh in this case, plays a very significant role. This might have been what Aglaia was referring to. Plays a very significant role in Serach's life, again, according to Midrashim. I just want to make sure before I continue to the next page, are people following how we're building brick by brick, thread by thread, creating a mountain of Midrashim based on other teachings, based on things that feel logical? Like, we already know so much more, again, according to Midrashim. I get that. So you could say, wait, all of this is made up. I understand that, but it's made up it's not made up, it's imagined, that's a better word, based on the fact that the Torah doesn't usually say anything about women, that the Torah mentions her twice, that the Torah told us that she's very old, twice as old as pretty much the oldest person. The Torah told us that she was important already in Genesis. So so it wasn't, I guess, important enough for the Torah to tell us all the details, but our Chachamim, our sages, did an amazing job building, following the breadcrumbs, building thread by thread, creating a tapestry, or brick by brick, creating a beautiful wall of stories about Serach. But what's so important to me is that, I could have jumped all the way to the end and said, well, Serach was mentioned here, and guess what? She did A, B, C. But that would not have been as meaningful. You'd be like, what? Doesn't say that anywhere in the Torah. But here you're seeing, because I found these breadcrumbs as I was researching, and they made sense to me, and that's what felt so beautiful. By the way, the original name that I gave to this when I said it in for my father's yard site, when I gave a shiur in his memory, was the Memory Keeper. The Memory Keeper. But people told me the most underrated woman in Tanach is a cooler name, and that's why I switched it. But I still think of her as the Memory Keeper, because as somebody pointed out, she's the only one left of that generation, so she has memory she's keeping within her, but in an eyewitness fashion. Not even that was told to her. She even has things that she remembers. And we know how powerful that is when we remember something and we say, no, that's what I remember from my childhood. She, he, this, that happened. Everybody with me? Great. If not, please let me know. Otherwise, I'll assume yes. Next step in our tale about Serach. We already know so much about her. Moving on to source 9. Okay. Now I'm taking a little bit, I'm putting on the side everything we learned so far. And now jumping to where the sages imagined, because they noticed something in the Torah that popped out at them. Remember the peh. Remember the mouth, which is also the letter peh. Okay. So this is a midrash, but based on words in the Torah. When Moshe, okay, do you remember the story? I probably should unshare for that. Remembering the story of how the Israelites got saved, because they imagined that there was a role that Serach played in saving the Israelites. That's what made the most sense to them. That somehow they needed her knowledge, her memory keeping, and that's what helped. But they saw this letter peh, and they said, wait a minute, we saw something about that peh. So who was the one who rescued the Israelites? What was that person's name? Not a trick question. Come on, you can unmute and tell me. Who rescued the Israelites? Moshe! Great. How did he rescue them? Burning bush. God says, you're going to be my emissary. He's like, no, I'm not. And God's like, yes, you are. And sends him. He meets his brother Aharon together. They come to the Israelites, who probably didn't remember Moshe that well because he grew up in the king's palace. But I guess Aaron was his kind of stamp of approval, his brother. And he rescues them and he talks to them. Let's see what he says to them, okay? Remembering, we're keeping in the back of our minds all the pieces about Serach. She's a memory keeper. She lived a long life. She lived at the time before Yosef even was, like, he was already in Egypt, but she lived before the time that he was, like, he died and was brought back and the Israelites were rescued. She lived from before that time. When Moshe and Aaron came to the elders of Israel and made signs. Remember, they made signs like the snake, right? He threw down his staff, and it turned to a snake, things like that. And he Moshe put his hand into his shirt. It came out not leprous, because that's not the right word, but it had sara'at, which is like a spiritual leprosy, where the skin turns different colors or becomes scaly. When he made the signs, what did the elders do? They're like, we don't know if this is real. Is this the real Savior? Or is it a guy masquerading? Who did they go to? Well, of course they went to Serach bat Asher. She's the only one living after 210 years. She's the only one who's 230 years old. And he says to her, a man came to us with these signs. And she's like, En boto ish mamash. Oh no, don't believe any charlatan who comes by. So they said to her, but the man said, Pakod yifkod Elokim etchem. Pakod, remember the peh, the mouth? There's a double using of the word God will remember you. God, by the way, pakod also means to count, and it also means to remember. Just going back, a little teeny hint to the counting, that Serach was part of the counting. Pakod yifkod, he used this like strange way of saying it, and she's like, oh, that's the guy. That's the guy. Why? I remember that my father Asher said to me, this is the code word. Pay, pakod, yifkod. By the way, the pay with and without the dot is the same letter. It's either pa or fa. It's the same letter. I don't know if you read Hebrew. For those who read Hebrew, there's a pay right here, and there's a pay here. This is without vowels. Pay, pakod, yifkod. She's like, that's him. He said the right words. He said the code words. How did he even know them? Well, obviously God told him. How would he know to use those special words? And she was the memory keeper. So Asher told her that. They immediately, that's why it says, by the way, I mean, it wasn't exactly at the same time, but there's a pasuk, yamin, I guess maybe there's a yud missing, ha'am vayishma'u ki pakad Hashem et amo. That the nation believed and God and listened because God had remembered God's people. Everybody with me on this? God had remembered God's people. Because that word, pakod yifkod, maybe they had had stories that a man was going to come and rescue him, or there's going to be some rescue, the same way we think about Mashiach, the Messiah. But she knew the code words, and Moshe used them. I continue and show you how our sages notice this pay in a few places. If you go look in Genesis, before Yosef died, do you remember he made his brothers swear that they would bring his Aron, his coffin, up with them when they leave Egypt? He says to his brothers, he was the first one to die, I think, even though he was almost the youngest, I am dying. God pakod yifkod etchem. God will remember you, but doubling the language again, pay, and will bring you out of this land, meaning the land of Egypt, to the land which God swore to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, meaning the land of Israel. And Yosef took an oath; he made them swear. Pakod yifkod Elochi, again repeating those magic keywords, and then you must promise that you will bring up my bones, meaning my coffin, from here. And then he died. He was only 110 years old. And they embalmed him and put him in a coffin in Egypt. We don't know where, just as a coffin in Egypt. Everybody with me on the Pakod Yifkod, how it pops up in a few places? And now we see, wait, I just want to go back up, 3:15:16. So this was in chapter 4, that Moshe and Aharon. Where did they learn those words from, Pakod Yifkod? Back in chapter 3, when God said to Moshe, go and gather the elders of Israel together, right? This is where God gave them the message. The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, has appeared to me, meaning to Moshe, saying, Pakod pakadati etchem. I, meaning God, has remembered you, meaning God gave these keywords to Moshe, and Moshe uses exactly those words, and so interesting that it's also the words that Yosef used. So these words, this magic phrase, not magic really, code words or keywords, they're following a trail of breadcrumbs where Serach becomes important. Now look and see how, again, she becomes important. Do you remember that when they left Egypt, all the Jews, the Israelites, were very busy gathering gold and silver from their Egyptian neighbors? And Moshe remembered the oath to Yosef. And what does he say? He wasn't alive. He wasn't there when Yosef made the brothers swear. But he uses the same words that Yosef used to make them swear to take his bones. Pakod yifkod Elokim etchem. And you made us swear, Yosef, that you will bring up my bones from Egypt. Now there's the Talmud has a Midrash. There are a lot of Midrashim in the Talmud. How did Moshe know where Yosef was buried? They said, I don't know who they is, that this is what happened. Serach bat Asher was the only one who remained. Remember, this is after 210 years. Serach is 230 years old. Moshe is 80 years old here. Remember, because it's before the 40 years in desert. Everybody with me? Moshe is 80. Serach is 230. And Moshe wasn't around at the time because it was towards the end of the time in Egypt. He wasn't even alive when this happened with Yosef. Moshe went to her and said, do you know where Yosef is buried? She said, the Egyptians buried him in an iron casket and placed him in the Nile so its waters would be blessed. Now you know where this Midrash comes from. So Moshe went and stood on the banks of the Nile, and he said, Yosef, Yosef, the time has come that the Holy One, blessed be He, swore that God would redeem the Israelites. The time has also come for the oath that Israel swore, meaning the Israelites, to bury Yosef in Israel. If you show yourself now, well and good. If not, we are free from your oath. And he used the magic words, pakod pakadati. Immediately, Yosef's casket floated to the surface. So now you know where that one came from. The whole connection that Moshe took them, because it never said where the casket was. I mean, theoretically, it could have been put in some, what are they called? A shrine or what are they called? I forgot what it's called when you have a grave site that's like an edifice and inside there are caskets. But this is what our lore tells us.
Sarcophagus?
What's the word?
Sarcophagus?
Yeah, the sarcophagus would be that's true. That would be the actual casket. But I meant there's like a building. A tomb. Yeah, I guess it was a tomb.
Pyramid. Could have been in a pyramid.
Yeah, or a pyramid. Right. But these are our Midrashim. Okay. Now, remember I'll put that afterwards. Okay. Why was it so important to have a living document? I want to tell you a story. Oh, wait, somebody wrote. Oh, there are tons of messages. Let me just read how did Asher know this? How did Asher know what? Which part? The Bakodif code? I'm not sure if you can just tell me what your question was, because I haven't been following the questions. Sarita. Sarita? Yeah, you want to unmute? How did he know the Bakodif code? I guess it was one of those stories that was told. I don't have an answer for that. I'm just quoting the Midrash, but I'm assuming they heard God say Bakodif code, or they knew the story, or Yosef said, whatever it is, that's ancient. And that was passed down. Now, wait, let me look and see more. Did they do Tahara? That's a great question. I don't exactly have an answer. I think they did embalming then, unfortunately, which is not something we do. Oh, thank you, Sue. That's a much later practice. And certainly not in Egypt. Thank you, Rabbi Yaakov. Tomb. Oh, mausoleum. That was the word I was looking for. Thank you. Oh, everybody's writing. In the TV series. Okay. Well, yeah, Arnie, I get it. I guess they didn't read that Midrash. Considering that Yosef was the vice, he would have had an elaborate tomb. But that's not, I'm just saying that's not our Midrashim, but that doesn't mean, since we don't have any written things about it, any of those. But here's the thing. The Bakodif code is so blatant that it made it so beautiful to be able to put the Bakodif code together in all these magical pieces that happened. So it might not have happened that way, but it feels quite beautiful that it might have happened that way. And I want to tell you about living documents. I don't know of history. That's what she was. She was a memory keeper, a living document of history. I don't know if you're familiar that in Israel, particular, that's 3 guys who are amazing, and they're mohel, they do circumcision, they're shochet, they learned how to shecht animals, they do many, many, many things. And one of the things that they decided to do was to make sure that the tradition of eating certain animals or insects would be kept alive before it disappeared. That's one of the things that they were interested in doing. And the Yemenites are the ones that kept that tradition. Now, you can't go on just somebody saying, I heard it. You actually have to have somebody who was living testimony. So they literally went to old Yemenite people and said to them, is this locust kosher? Is this locust kosher? Oh, and they said, oh, that one. That's the one we used to eat in Yemen. And that's how they kept the tradition alive. In fact, my brother Aharon went to this weird meal that they had where they served all these different things that are part of our, sorry, I apologize to the vegans or vegetarians on this. I'm just telling you something that happened. This idea of having a living document of history. And the Serach in this case we're being told that she was that living document of history. Now, I want to share a few more sources. Here's another beautiful one. People here are familiar with the Eshet Chayil that people sing Friday night about wise or woman of valor. So one of the most famous lines is, I don't know if you know this tune, but it's Pi hapatra bechochma v'torat chesed aleshona. Pi hapatra, her mouth opened in wisdom. What do we see here? The pay. So because she is so associated with our Midrashim, with the pei pakod yifkod. So one of the Midrashim on this pasuk is, she is the woman whose mouth opened in wisdom. This is the Midrash. This is the woman. There's a story in Shmuel, Samuel 2, about a wise woman who spoke to Yoav and saved a whole city in her wisdom. And according to the Midrash, since she lived anyway a long time, she's still alive. And her name is Serach bat Asher. Because they noticed the Pi HaPatra. Oh, so that verse in Eshet Chayil must be talking about Serach bat Asher. By the way, there's another very beautiful Midrash, which I don't have here, that the rabbis were talking in the Beit Midrash, and they were discussing what did the crossing of the sea, the Kriyat Yam Suf, look like. They said, were the walls, somebody said, oh, the walls were like columns of something, I don't remember what. And Serach bat Asher, in this story, was walking by the rabbis. This is 1,000 years later, by the way, because their rabbis are sitting in the Beis Medrash. And she says to them, what are you talking about? They weren't like walls like that. They were translucent. And you could actually see things that were inside. I know. I was there. So Serach pops up in so many places, right at the right moment, a little bit like Elijah. Some people believe that she never died. Some people believe that maybe at some point she did. Meaning, when I say people, I mean our Midrashim. So you should know, if you ever see Serach, you will see her popping up in different places all through time. It's just the most opportune. And this is the last sources I want to share with you. Somebody just showed me this, and it's something we read in the last Parsha on Simchat Torah, V'zot HaBeracha. These are the blessings that Moses, gave the tribes before his death. Not the fathers of the tribes. At this point, Serach is 270 years old. So on the verse that blesses Asher, so bear with me here. What did he say? Baruch mi banim Asher. Asher should be blessed over all the other sons. Remember, there are 12 sons. Yehi ritzui echav. He should be the favored or favored by his brethren. Tovel bashemen raglo. Dip his foot in oil. Barzel unchoshet min alecha. Your shoes should be made of something sturdy. In this case, iron and steel. Uchyamecha dovecha. And your security should last all your days. So this is very poetic. There are many ways to understand it, but the Baal HaTurim was written by the Yosef ben Asher, actually, not on purpose that it was Asher, it just happens to be that his father's name was Asher. He wrote, in addition to the Halachic Code of Jewish Law, something that the Halachic Code of Jewish Law was based on. He wrote the 4 columns, the Arba Turim, which is the 4 different major parts of Jewish law, and then the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, based his code of Jewish law, something that we follow till today. That's what we take, that's our sources, is based on it. And he also wrote a commentary on the Torah. He was extremely prolific. So he says about these psukim, listen to what he says. I translated, by the way, there was no translation. Blessed is Asher above the sons. Therefore Moshe blessed him with these words, because when the tribes, the brothers, sold Joseph down to Egypt, they swore each other to secrecy on pain of excommunication. And Serach, the daughter of Asher, knew about the sale through prophecy. Like, they didn't tell their wives, they didn't tell their children. They made a pact among themselves. We're the only ones who know. And for some reason, Serach knew. And that, by the way, connects back. And I haven't done that. Like, I haven't figured that out yet. Somebody just showed this to me. That connects back that they asked Serach to be the one to break the news to Yaakov, interestingly. And she would believe it. Right? She would believe, maybe that's the way it connects. She would believe what they say because she knew they had sold him. But nobody was supposed to know because the brother said, where did she know it from and not from Asher? How else can a child know except from her father or mother? They excommunicated Asher because remember what they said, we're making a pact. You're not allowed to say that we sold him to Egypt because they didn't want that to get back to their father because they were shamed. Then Moshe Rabbeinu comes and undid the excommunication. And I looked this up because I didn't know this, but it turns out somebody who's in Cherem at the time, I wouldn't say that happens today, is not allowed to have sexual relations, is not allowed to wear regular shoes, just wear Yom Kippur shoes, is not allowed to anoint himself with oil or herself. These are all things that have to do with Yom Kippur. I don't know why there's an action. They have to not allow themselves pleasure. So Moshe says, the Cherem's not allowed to have sexual relations. I'm undoing it. Now, not only you're allowed to, you'll be blessed and be more prolific than all your other brothers. Since the brothers would avoid him, it's now the tribe of Asher. Moshe said, may you be favored among your brothers. That's undoing the fact that they would not speak to him. He was not allowed to anoint himself, so Moshe said, may he dip his foot in oil. So they may be allowed to be anointed in oil. He was not allowed to wear regular shoes, so Moshe said, may your shoes be made of iron and copper. And this feels like the Balaturim just brought everything back together again with Serach bat Asher and added one more piece to this puzzle.
How did the brothers know that Serach knew about Mechirat Yosef?
I mean, it's not written anywhere, but I guess she knew. She must have told them, or I don't know. This is a Midrash. I don't have an explanation. We don't have a specific time. The only thing I'd say it was based on is that it's based on the fact that she believed them when they asked her to break the news to Yaakov. That actually works in tandem with that Midrash. Because otherwise, maybe somebody else would say, what are you talking about, is in Mitzrayim? We saw his tunic. It was torn apart and bloodied. So maybe, that's what I'm imagining, that it's connected to that Midrash. I don't have a better answer for you, Dara. But thank you for the question.
Thank you so much, Rabbanit Bracha. It was a very insightful class. We can take about one more question to wrap up this class. So feel free to raise your hand and unmute or put your question in the chat.
Just want to remind people, when we started an hour ago, some people here had never heard of her. And others who had heard of her may have known the Midrashim, but not really knowing why. And today, doesn't it feel like she's kind of three-dimensional? Not today, now. Like, we've created this whole space about her, this mountain of Midrashim, that makes sense. Or, to me, that makes sense. I hope that makes sense to you. And I always love how we go from not knowing anything about her, from 6 words in the Torah, to this beautiful story of how she was helpful and useful and her long life was meaningful and how Yaakov blessed her and how each step of the way there was something that made sense that brought the rabbis, the sages along one more time, one more piece. So today we have more of a well-rounded, fully fleshed out personality called Asher.
Thank you so much.
Called Serach.
Thank you all so much for coming. And I just want to know about one more class that we're having this week, the 2024 election, Reflections on the Jewish Vote with Dr. Stephen Windmiller. Thank you all so much for coming and have a great rest of your day.
Same. Bye, everybody.